I was supposed to spend my 73rd birthday surrounded by the people I loved most. Instead, it became the night I realized my son's wife had been quietly dismantling my life for nearly a year, and I almost let her finish. Let me tell you what I saw. And what I did about it. The party was held at my son's house in Decatur, Georgia. My son Lawrence had decorated the backyard himself. String lights across the fence, round tables with white tablecloths, a cooler full of sweet tea and lemonade. He'd even ordered a 3-layer carrot cake from that bakery on Ponce de Leon that I'd been going to since before he was born. It wasn't extravagant, it was thoughtful. And for most of the evening, I thought it was perfect. I am Evelyn Cross. For 31 years, I worked as a licensed financial examiner for the state of Georgia. My job was to audit insurance companies, review claims records, and flag irregularities before they became fraud cases. I reviewed thousands of documents over the course of my career. I know how paper trails work. I know how people hide things inside perfectly normal-looking paperwork. I also know how long a careful person can operate before anyone notices. I'm telling you this so you understand. I did not stumble into what I eventually discovered. I recognized it because I had spent 3 decades learning exactly how it worked. My son Lawrence is 51 years old. He has his father's broad shoulders and his grandmother's stubbornness. We lost my husband Gerald to a stroke 6 years ago, and after that, Lawrence and I grew even closer. He called every Sunday. He drove down from Atlanta when the roof needed fixing. When I had knee surgery 2 years ago, he stayed with me for 10 days and made soup, badly but tried very hard. His wife's name is Brenda. Lawrence married Brenda 4 years ago, and I will be honest with you, I wanted to love her. She was smart, well-presented, and worked in estate planning at a firm in Buckhead. She knew how to walk into a room and make people feel like she had already decided how the evening would go. I told myself that confidence was something to admire. But about 14 months before my birthday party, something shifted. It started quietly, the way these things always do. I was visiting Lawrence and Brenda for Thanksgiving. After dinner, while Lawrence was watching football and my granddaughter Amara was asleep on the couch, Brenda sat down at the kitchen table with me. She poured herself more wine and asked, almost as an afterthought, whether I had updated my estate documents since Gerald passed. I told her yes. Gerald and I had updated everything together about a year before he died. I had a will, a healthcare directive, and a durable power of attorney, all signed and notarized, all filed with my attorney. Brenda nodded. Then she said, "But who did you name for the financial power of attorney?" I paused. "My attorney manages that." She tilted her head. "You named your attorney, not Lawrence?" "It's a professional arrangement," I said. "It keeps things clean." She smiled at that. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone storing information away. I didn't think much of it that night. People in estate planning ask those questions. It's their professional habit, the same way I used to look at insurance disclosures, the way other people read menus. But the questions kept coming. The following February, Brenda called me on a Tuesday afternoon, said she was just checking in. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular, Amara's school play, the weather, and then she mentioned that she'd been thinking about me and wanted to make sure I had someone helping me stay organized now that I was getting on in years. Getting on in years. I was 72. I told her I was fine. She said she was sure I was, but that it was natural for things to get a little harder to track. She mentioned that a colleague of hers had recently had an older client set up a simplified financial system, consolidating accounts, setting up automatic bill pay, assigning a trusted family member to oversee things. I told her I had been overseeing my own things for longer than she had been alive. She laughed and said I was funny. A month later, she and Lawrence came to visit for a long weekend. On Saturday afternoon, while Lawrence took Amara to the park, Brenda offered to help me go through the filing cabinet in my home office. She said she wanted to help me declutter. I said I didn't need help decluttering. She offered again very pleasantly, with that same composed smile. I let her sit in the office while I made tea. When I came back, she was holding a folder, my homeowner's insurance policy, and reading it, not flipping through, reading. I set the tea down and said, "Can I help you find something?" She looked up and said, "Oh, I was just curious. This is a really good policy. Gerald set this up." "I set it up," I said. "Gerald and I together." She nodded slowly. "Do you know off the top of your head what the property value is listed as?" I told her. She looked mildly surprised. Then she said, "You keep all your records here? Original copies?" I closed the folder and took it from her hands. That evening, I called my friend Wanda. Wanda retired 2 years ahead of me from the same office. She was a senior claims investigator for almost 20 years. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Evelyn, that woman is mapping your assets." I wanted to believe Wanda was wrong. But then, 3 months later, I was sitting on my back porch in the evening and I heard Brenda on the other side of the screen door talking on her phone. Her voice was low but clear. She said, "The old woman doesn't have anyone checking behind her. That's the whole point." A pause. Then, "We just need the right moment. One clear opening. One clear opening." I sat completely still until I heard her go back inside. I told myself there were other explanations. Maybe she was talking about a client. Maybe it was about a property transaction. Maybe I was a tired old woman reading meaning into something that wasn't there. But I had spent 31 years learning to recognize when a pattern wasn't a coincidence. And what I was seeing was a pattern. By the time my birthday party arrived, I had been watching carefully for 6 more months. I had not confronted Brenda. I had not said a word to Lawrence. Instead, I had quietly done 3 things. I called my attorney, a woman named Harriet who I had worked with for 15 years, and I told her everything. She updated my documents and flagged my accounts. I called my bank and had a notation placed on my records that no changes could be made to any account without my direct in-person authorization. And I called Wanda, who agreed to come to the birthday party and keep her eyes open with me. I want to be clear about something. I did not go to my birthday party expecting trouble. I went hoping I was wrong. I wanted to eat carrot cake and dance to Marvin Gaye and watch Amara run around the backyard in her good dress and just breathe. That's what I wanted. For the first 2 hours, that is exactly what happened. Lawrence made a toast. He talked about the year his father died and how I had kept the house running and never stopped calling to check on him, even when I was the one who needed checking on. He said I was the strongest person he had ever known and that he hoped someday to have half my backbone. Half the guests were crying. I was definitely crying. Then Brenda stood up beside him and added something. She talked about how important it is for families to take care of one another, about how transitions, she used that word specifically, transitions, could be hard for older adults, and how lucky I was to have Lawrence nearby. She said she was proud to be part of this family and that she and Lawrence were committed to making sure I was always supported. It sounded like a toast, but it felt like a filing. Wanda was sitting 2 tables away. When I looked at her, she raised her eyebrows slightly. Brenda's mother was at the party. Her name was Arlene, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair cut close, wearing a coral pantsuit that cost more than my first car. Arlene had been appearing in my orbit more and more over the past year. She came to Lawrence and Brenda's house on holidays. She had started calling me occasionally, and she asked the same types of questions Brenda did, softly, pleasantly, with a kind of manufactured warmth that I recognized from fraud interviews. Arlene came and sat beside me near the dessert table that evening. She patted my hand and said I looked wonderful. Then she said, "You know, Evelyn, my sister went through something similar after she retired. Just felt a little overwhelmed keeping up with everything. It's nothing to be ashamed of." I had not told anyone I was overwhelmed. I said, "I'm doing just fine, Arlene. Thank you." She smiled. "Of course you are. But it's nice to have people who can step in, isn't it? Just in case." Before I could respond, Lawrence called everyone over for cake. I stood up and walked toward the table where they were cutting the carrot cake. Brenda was beside me, handing me a plate. She leaned in as she passed it over and said quietly, "I put a little extra of that cream cheese frosting on yours. I know you love it." I smiled and thanked her. I took the plate and walked to an empty seat near the side fence. I sat it down and said hello to my neighbor Clementine, who had come with her daughter. We talked for a moment about the lights in the backyard, and that's when I saw Brenda approach from my left. She didn't see me watching her. She was looking down at the plate, my plate, and her right hand moved toward the edge of it, just briefly, just for a second. Then she looked up and our eyes met. She straightened immediately and smiled. "Just making sure your napkin didn't blow away," she said. The napkin was under the plate, weighted down. I looked at her. I kept my face completely still, the same face I used to wear in audit meetings when I'd already found what I was looking for and was waiting for the other person to keep talking. "Thank you," I said. She walked away. I looked down at the plate. The frosting looked undisturbed. Everything looked normal. But something inside me, not panic, not hysteria, just that quiet professional certainty that had served me for 3 decades, said, "Don't eat it." I looked around the yard. Wanda was watching me from across the tables. I gave her the smallest nod. And then I looked at Arlene. She was seated alone now at the table to my right, her own plate barely touched in front of her, turned slightly in her seat to watch the guests. She had that pleased expression she sometimes wore, the one that made her look like a woman who had already decided how the evening would end. I made a decision. I pulled out the chair beside Arlene and sat down. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" I asked. She looked delighted. "Please." We talked. About the weather. About Amara school. I kept my voice relaxed, my posture easy. And while she turned to wave at someone across the yard, I slid my plate, carefully, smoothly, the way you move a document across a desk without looking like you're doing anything significant, in front of her. And I pulled her untouched plate in front of me. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds. Arlene turned back and continued talking. She picked up her fork, or rather my fork, and began eating the cake. I sat with my hands folded. 15 feet away, I could see Brenda standing near the gift table. She was watching us. I saw her eyes drop to the plates, then back to my face. Something moved across her expression that she didn't quite manage to suppress. Not quite confusion, not quite alarm, but something between the two. She looked away. I ate a bite of Arlene's cake. It was delicious. About 25 minutes later, Arlene set down her fork and pressed her fingers to her temple. "It's a little warm out here," she said. "It's a beautiful night," I said. She blinked. "Is it?" She blinked. "Is it?" She reached for her water. Her movements were slower than they had been. Deliberate, like she was measuring each one. Wanda appeared at my elbow. "You want to take a walk?" she asked me, which was our signal. "In a minute," I said. Arlene tried to stand. Her chair scraped back unevenly, and she grabbed the table edge. "I think I need some air," she murmured. Clementine's daughter, who was a home health nurse, was already moving toward her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Arlene didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved around the backyard slowly, like she was trying to locate something she couldn't quite name. Brenda crossed the yard in 4 fast steps. "Mom!" Her voice was sharp. She took Arlene's arm. "What's happening? What did you eat?" Arlene shook her head vaguely. Brenda turned to look at me. It was a short look, maybe 2 seconds, but I've been in rooms with people who just realized their scheme had collapsed, and I recognized the expression perfectly. Lawrence called for an ambulance. He didn't hesitate, and I was grateful for that. While we waited, Clementine's daughter sat with Arlene and kept her calm and talking. Arlene was conscious. She knew her name. She knew where she was. But her words were slow and her coordination was off, and she couldn't explain why. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They were professional and calm. They asked what she had eaten, what she had drunk, whether she had any medications. Brenda answered quickly, rattling off information. But when one of the paramedics asked if anything unusual had happened before the symptoms started, Brenda said, "She sat down with my mother-in-law and had some cake." Lawrence turned to look at me. I said clearly and evenly I had the same cake. "I'm completely fine." No one said anything more. Arlene was taken to Emory. Lawrence rode with Brenda to the hospital. Wanda stayed behind with me. We sat on the back porch after most of the guests had left, and I told her everything, including the plate switch. Wanda looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You already have a lawyer on this?" "Yes." "And your accounts are locked?" "Yes." "And your accounts are locked?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then tomorrow morning you call Harriet and you tell her what happened tonight. Every detail." I already knew I would. But before I did, there was one more thing. While Wanda was helping the last guests find their coats, I walked quietly to the table where Arlene had been sitting. The plate was still there. My original plate, the one Brenda had touched. I found a large plastic storage container in Lawrence's kitchen, the kind people use for leftovers, and I placed the plate inside it and sealed it. I put it in Wanda's car. If anyone asked, I had simply set it aside. I did not sleep well that night. Not because I was frightened. I had stopped being frightened about 2 months before the party, when I had finally stopped hoping I was wrong and started preparing for the fact that I was right. What kept me awake was something else, something quieter and harder. The thought of Lawrence, of Amara, of what the next few days were going to require. I called Harriet at 8 the next morning. She listened without interrupting. Harriet has been practicing law in Atlanta for over 30 years. She is precise, calm, and nearly impossible to rattle. When I finished, she said, "Evelyn, did you preserve the plate?" "Yes." "Where is it?" "Secured, refrigerated." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We need to have it tested immediately. I can coordinate with a private laboratory, one I've used in cases like this before. It will take a few days for results." "How many days?" 3 to 5. "And Evelyn, in the meantime, do not confront Brenda. Do not tell Lawrence the specifics yet." I asked her why not. She said, "Because right now Brenda doesn't know what you preserved. She doesn't know about the plate. She's going to spend the next few days believing she has control of the narrative. Let her." I understood exactly what Harriet meant. A person who thinks they're winning makes different decisions than a person who knows they've been caught. Lawrence called me that afternoon. He sounded exhausted. Arlene was being kept for observation. The doctors were running tox screens and hadn't found anything conclusive yet, but they were looking at a possible sedative reaction. He said the word sedative carefully, like he wasn't sure what to do with it. I said that must be frightening for Brenda. "She's pretty upset," he said. I said I was sure she was. Then he said quietly, "Mom, Brenda mentioned that Arlene ate your cake." I said, "Arlene and I were sitting together. We both had cake." "Right," he said. "But Brenda thinks maybe there was some mix-up with the plates." I kept my voice steady. "Lawrence, I'm fine. I'm standing in my kitchen making coffee, and I feel completely normal. Would you like to come over?" He said he would try to come tomorrow. He did not mention a mix-up again that day. The lab results came back 4 days later. Harriet called me on a Thursday morning while I was watering the plants on my front porch. "Evelyn," she said, "there was a substance in the food sample." I set down the watering can. "What kind?" I asked. "A benzodiazepine. A sedative. The concentration was significant, not lethal, but enough to cause serious impairment, confusion, disorientation, memory disruption. She paused. In a woman your age, in front of a yard full of family and friends, that level of impairment would have been noticeable. I stood very still on the porch. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. A cloud moved across the sun. She wanted me to look unstable, I said. Harriet said, that appears to be the intent. I asked her what came next. She said, I've already prepared a formal letter to Brenda's legal representatives. I learned this morning that she quietly retained someone this week. In that letter, I'm disclosing the laboratory findings and making clear that any attempt to initiate guardianship proceedings will be met with this evidence, and if she tries anyway, then we are very well prepared, Harriet said. But Evelyn, I want you to understand something. What this evidence shows is not just that someone tried to embarrass you at a party, it shows deliberate, premeditated action that has criminal implications. I had already thought about that. What are my options? I asked. Harriet walked me through them slowly, the way a good attorney does, not pushing me toward any one direction, just laying the ground clearly so I could walk it myself. I could file a police report. I could pursue civil action. I could present the evidence in response to any legal challenge and simply let it stand there. Or I could do all three, depending on how things developed. She said, what I want you to think about before you decide anything is your son. That was the hardest part of the whole conversation. 2 days later, Lawrence came to the house. He sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him and did not speak for a long time. I had told him everything, the months of questions, the phone call I had overheard, what I saw at the party, the plate, the lab results. I had shown him the documents Harriet had prepared. He looked older sitting there than he had at the party. She told me you'd been getting confused, he finally said. She said she'd seen it at Thanksgiving, that you forgot where you'd put things, that you repeated yourself. I said, did you ever notice that yourself? He shook his head slowly. She said, I probably just didn't see it because I wasn't paying close enough attention. I didn't say anything to that. I just let it sit. After a while, he said, Mom, I'm sorry. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. I told him that I knew he had been doing what people do when they trust someone they love. He had taken her word for it. That was not weakness. That was just being human. But I also told him that we were going to have to face what the evidence showed clearly and directly, because the alternative was to pretend it hadn't happened. And I had not spent 31 years in a fraud examiner's office to look away from evidence. Lawrence met with Harriet on his own the following week. I did not ask him what they discussed. What I know is that he came back from that meeting looking like a man who had set something down that he had been carrying for a long time. Brenda's attorney withdrew the inquiry about guardianship within 2 weeks of Harriet's disclosure letter. There was no filing, no petition. The whole apparatus that had been quietly assembling for 14 months simply stopped. Arlene was released from the hospital after 2 days. She recovered fully. I have no anger toward Arlene specifically, though I am also not foolish enough to believe she was entirely uninvolved. What I know is that whatever she knew or didn't know, she is also the one who ended up in the hospital. There is something in that which I leave to a higher understanding than mine. The weeks after were quiet in the way that things are quiet after a storm has passed and you are still standing in the yard looking at what it moved. Harriet finalized a comprehensive estate protection package, a revocable living trust, an updated durable power of attorney with a successor trustee who is not a family member, and a letter of instruction to my bank requiring my physical presence for any account changes. These are not dramatic gestures, they are practical ones. The kind any woman over 60 should have in place. Full stop. My neighbor Clementine brought me a sweet potato pie 2 Sundays after the party. She sat at my kitchen table and said, Evelyn, I don't know exactly what happened at that party, but I know what I saw. And you handled yourself with more dignity than most people ever will. I told her I didn't feel particularly dignified. I felt tired. She said, "Dignity isn't about how you feel. It's about what you do." Lawrence came for dinner on the last Saturday of the month. He came alone. He helped me set the table and we ate and talked about Amara and about a documentary he'd watched about the Georgia coastline and about whether I wanted to finally take that trip to Savannah I'd been putting off since Gerald died. I said yes, I thought it was time. At the end of the evening, he stood on the front porch for a while before getting in his car. He said, "I should have trusted you." I said, "You trust me now. That's what matters." He looked like he wanted to say more. I let him decide not to. I want to say something directly to anyone listening, because this isn't just a story about one family. Financial exploitation of older adults is one of the most common and least reported forms of abuse in this country. The National Council on Aging estimates it costs older Americans billions of dollars every year, and the people who carry it out are not always strangers. Most of the time, they are people who have been given access to your home, to your paperwork, to your trust. The things that protected me were not luck. They were decisions. Paying attention when something felt wrong, even when I couldn't yet name what it was. Calling a professional before the situation became a crisis. Keeping my financial documents and legal arrangements in order. Preserving evidence instead of confronting in the moment. And trusting myself. That last one is harder than it sounds, because when someone you love has been told repeatedly that you're confused, that you're slipping, that you need help you didn't ask for, after a while, the doubt can start to feel like it belongs to you, like maybe they're right and you just can't see it. It doesn't belong to you. It was put there on purpose. Your instincts, the ones built from decades of living, working, raising children, surviving loss, and still getting up every morning. Those instincts are not a symptom. They are your most important asset. Protect them the same way you protect everything else. If someone in your life is asking questions about your finances that don't sit right, trust that feeling. If someone is making comments about your memory in front of witnesses, pay attention to the pattern. If you hear something that doesn't make sense and your first instinct is to explain it away, stop. Write it down. Call someone you trust. Because the truth about these situations is simple. People who have nothing to hide don't need you confused. And if you are sitting in a backyard somewhere on what was supposed to be a beautiful night and something tells you not to eat that cake, listen to it. I want to hear from you. If you've been through something similar, or if someone you love has, tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. These stories travel farther than I ever expect them to, and every person who shares their experience helps someone else recognize what they're looking at before it's too late. If stories like this one speak to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And take care of yourselves. You've earned it. I've had a long time now to sit with everything that happened. The party, the plate, the phone call from Harriet, the look on Lawrence's face when he finally understood. And the thing I keep coming back to isn't the betrayal itself. It's how long it had been building before I let myself see it clearly. Brenda didn't wake up one morning and decide to do what she did. That's the part people don't want to think about because it's uncomfortable. What she did took months of patient, careful construction. Every question about my finances, every soft comment about my memory, every time she made sure Lawrence was nearby to hear it, that was work. Deliberate, sustained, purposeful work, and the uncomfortable truth is that it almost worked. Not because I was weak or confused, but because I wanted to believe the best about someone my son loved. That instinct to extend grace, to give the benefit of the doubt, to explain away the thing that doesn't sit right. That instinct comes from something good in us. I don't regret having it, but I learned at 73 years old that grace without discernment is just vulnerability with a prettier name. What protected me wasn't bravery. I want to be honest about that. It was habit. 31 years of looking at documents and asking why something looks the way it does. Who benefits from this arrangement? What would this look like to someone who didn't already trust the person presenting it? Those habits didn't leave me when I retired, and on the night of my birthday party, standing in my son's backyard with a plate of carrot cake in front of me, they were the only thing I had. People talk about intuition like it's mysterious, like it arrives out of nowhere and you either have it or you don't. But I think intuition is really just experience that you haven't consciously processed yet. When something feels wrong before you can name why, that feeling is your whole life speaking to you. Every hard thing you've survived, every time you trusted someone and were right, and every time you trusted someone and weren't. All of it compressed into a single quiet signal. The question is whether you listen to it. Lawrence is rebuilding. It's slow and it's real, and I am grateful for both of those things. There are no shortcuts through the kind of reckoning he had to do. Looking back at 14 months of small moments and understanding what he had accepted as true and why. That takes courage of a specific kind. Not the loud kind. The kind that requires you to sit still with something painful and not look away from it. What I hope for anyone listening is this: your history is not a liability. The decades you have lived, the things you have navigated, the losses you have carried and kept going anyway, those do not make you a burden or a problem to be managed. They make you someone who knows things. Act like it. Keep your documents in order. Keep your accounts in your name. Keep at least one person in your life who will tell you the truth without softening it to the point where it loses its shape. And if someone in your life keeps gently, pleasantly, repeatedly suggesting that you're not quite as capable as you used to be, ask yourself who benefits from you believing that. The answer will tell you everything you need to know.